And now it is time to dive deeper into the business model of the project that is being developed. And I would like to invite Wito van Oijstaeijen from the University of Antwerp to come on screen and tell us more about the concept of the business model and how it can support decision-making in support of green infrastructures. Wito, are you there?
I am here. Let me start immediately. So the Nature Smart Cities business model concept is something that I will talk about. I will talk about how we bridged theory with practice. We've seen some nice examples of the practice already. Now we're gonna see how academia comes together with these ambitions of local authorities. So we've seen the challenges that Phil told us about. These are the key challenges that were identified in the beginning of the project, and I will try to explain how these challenges were included in the further development of the business model. So in this presentation, I will mainly explain how we developed the concept of our Nature Smart Cities business model. I will try to tell the journey that we have made as a consortium to reach the business model as it is defined today. I will do this by explaining how different sources of information have contributed, and I hope you will get a thorough understanding of the purpose of the business model and how it works, and the value of having said partnership between academia and local authorities. For now, I'm expanding a little bit on the different building blocks that were shown to you earlier in the scheme by Anna, and I will try to clarify how every building block has come to the concept of our business model. Finally, I will also, of course, describe this very concept. This all is a little bit of scientific background that I'm hoping to present in an understandable and accessible manner. But if it happens that you don't understand certain steps, I invite you to ask your questions at the end of my presentation. Later, after my presentation and after the panel session, my colleague Mayra Finizola Silva will then illustrate how the testing of this concept was executed on our different city pilots, of which you've seen a few in the video earlier, and there will be a few more introduced along the way. Then after Mayra, I will very concretely reveal what this business model looks like in practice and show you how local authorities can and hopefully will benefit from it. So a lot of interesting stuff ahead of us, but as I said, let me start with the background and the reasoning behind all of this by explaining the building blocks. The first two building blocks were already described by Phil, as I've mentioned. Let me just remind you of one of the most important conclusions of this research. So first of all, we found that evidencing value is an important barrier. The ability for smaller authorities to present a convincing business case. So that means, why should the municipality invest in green infrastructure? What will it gain from doing so? That's something that's currently a barrier, as was also confirmed by the poll. Next, challenges lie in comparing green with gray alternatives. So being able to present green as a clear and reliable alternative to gray infrastructure types is currently very difficult. And then there's the shortage of time, skills, and resources. Concludingly, Phil also suggested that tools might be able to solve a few of these issues, and that brings us immediately to the next building block. So we conducted a desk review of a selection of existing green infrastructure valuation tools, and a few of the main conclusions of this research are listed in this slide, and they contribute to some of the gaps that we've identified in current practices and that we aim to overcome with the Nature Smart Cities business model. So first of all, we noticed that decision support tools combining biophysical and economic impacts are scarce. Most of the time, a tool chooses either to do a biophysical assessment or an economic assessment. Since ecosystem services research has been booming in the last 2 decades, something that we recommend from our review is to use this framework. So given that much research is being conducted on ecosystem services, this means that figures could be updated easily in the future if toolkits were to use this ecosystem services framework. Then tools are mostly suited to be deployed by local authorities in early stages of spatial design and planning. That's where the largest benefit lies for these tools. Next, at this moment, comprehensive data on benefits and costs of green infrastructure is limited. which leads to incomplete value assessments or assessments that only include benefits, for example, and not consider the costs. Then lastly, and this is something that we not only noticed from our review, but was also confirmed from Phil's interviews, toolkits are currently relatively unused. So one of the most important reasons for this is that we find that most of these tools are not matched with its target audience, local authorities. So in this reasoning, we claim that co-development of such tools is key to realize widespread uptake. Then our last building block, the geographical, biophysical, and economic data. For this building block, we collaborated with the Ignition project, and our colleagues from Ignition have created a very valuable database, which was perfectly fit to integrate with the purpose of our business model. And then apart from this, there was also more data collection through academic literature reviews. And this was a joint effort by the University of Antwerp, Ghent University, and Imperial College London. So combining and defining these building blocks brings us to the oversight of how we got to our business model concepts. Again, this illustrates what we believe is the most important asset of our business model. This combination of theoretical knowledge and practical insights. With the feedback loop of the demonstrator testing below, which will be explained to you later on, we believe to make an applicable framework for local authorities. So from the practice side, we've identified several features that our business model should have in order to be successful. First, it should provide arguments to justify investments. Local authorities should be able to transparently compose qualitative and quantitative arguments for a range of GI types. And this has to be done in a structured and visually enhanced way. So what is needed is a very clear and accessible method, allowing to be used and interpreted by non-experts too. These visuals can also aid local authorities to compose an intuitive and easily interpretable oversight of their investment. Next, an evidence base needs to be in place. And this can be achieved through combining previously composed databases, such as the Ignition database that I've mentioned before, and expanding this with new examples, for example, on cost data. Also, local authorities would benefit from ballpark figures for gray alternatives, because this would facilitate making the comparison between green and gray. Through our Nature Smart Cities program and through events like these, we already attempt to raise awareness. However, through the case that can be formed with the business model, local authorities are guided to communicate to different stakeholder groups, thus increasing awareness more. This is also something that we noticed local authorities would really benefit from. Then local authorities require a clear step-by-step method that guides them along the way. And of course, the business model should be practical and useful. To get from this conceptual and set of ideas to a more practical business model, there was a lot of this, and unfortunately later on more things like this and this. But by addressing all these challenges presented by Phil and combining these with the insights from the other two building blocks led us to the development of the actual business model. In this conceptual phase, we identified several goals for our business model. These are the 4 key outcomes that should be fulfilled for a project to be successful. First, the business model should be able to produce information that assists and supports decision makers. Then it needs to do this by generating estimations and ballpark figures of the potential impacts of greening interventions. This will then lead to providing the handles that will facilitate green infrastructure investments. And concludingly, the business model should be a tool that not only supports decision-making, but also project planning. The latter, the planning part, brings us to the funnel graphic on the right. We would position our business model in the initial stages of infrastructure projects. So by applying the business model at the project idea stage, uncertainties can be reduced considerably. This will lead to more desirable outcomes in the project realization stage. So the aim for our business model is very clear. It should be able It should be to take away much of these initial uncertainties. And how we will do this? We'll do this by facilitating local authorities to demonstrate the expected costs and benefits, and by providing an easily accessible framework that is widely applicable. The previous all focused on the lessons that we've learned from practice. What comes now is our attempt to address these challenges appropriately from a scientific point of view. That's why the following slides are a little bit more theoretical. So at the core of our business model will be a multi-criteria analysis. While this sounds very complex, it really isn't, and I'll try to clarify for you. So a multi-criteria analysis, the term almost speaks for itself. So in fact, we will simultaneously analyze performance of different scenarios on different or multiple criteria. This allows us to reveal trade-offs that occur, synergies, and potential opportunities to improve projects. There are more reasons to opt for this approach. First, green infrastructure is characterized by multifunctionality. This is a huge asset, but it can also introduce confusion. Sometimes this may lead to the belief that it is less suited for single purposes. With the approach of the multi-criteria analysis, we want to overcome this confusion and turn it more into the asset it was in the first place. This method, the multi-criteria analysis, serves perfectly to compare gray infrastructure with green infrastructure and even include hybrid solutions. Once again, a reminder of what Phil told us about the difficulties that are currently there. The third reason is the advantage of an MCA. The advantage of an MCA is that the assessment is flexible. So according to the type of green infrastructure, the location of the project, the desires of the user can opt for different criteria to include in the assessment. Further, the MCA is also very adaptable and responsive for users. For different stakeholder groups, the user can, for example, choose different criteria to highlight. Another advantage is the fact that we can combine qualitative and quantitative data, because as cliché as it sounds, the key to a good forecast is to not limit yourself to quantitative information. And lastly, the MCA works in various contexts and is easily adaptable to the scale of the proposed project. So, for example, for larger projects, more resources could be invested to make the MCA more detailed. These criteria, the criteria that we use for this assessment are ecosystem services. In this slide, you find a definition of the concept of ecosystem services, which is actually just a fancy way of implying all benefits that people obtain from ecosystems or from green infrastructure in this case. In our framework, we have included the following ecosystem services as criteria. For all of these ecosystem services, that means that guidance is provided on how to evaluate the impact of different scenarios on these ecosystem services. Maira will tell you more about some of these in her presentation on the pilot testing, and you will see it in practice later on in this webinar. Then the next theoretical pillar of our assessment relates to the value proposition of our business model, or in other words, how added value is created and described. This pillar is demonstrated by the pyramid on the right-hand side. So this pyramid tells us that the whole range of benefits that we receive from green infrastructure or ecosystem services can only be captured partially by qualitative assessments. A smaller part can then be expressed quantitatively, and ultimately only a marginal fraction can be assessed monetarily. With our business model, by using all of these methods, so qualitative, quantitative, and monetary assessment, we will guide you through this flow from qualitative to monetary values, and we aim to provide an assessment of impact of green infrastructure that is as comprehensive as possible. This brings me to summarize and to once again underline the power of our approach. So it is not just a scientifically approved framework, but this scientific and theoretical foundation is tailor-made to provide answers to current gaps between theory and practice. In this way, our business model evolved into an accessible tool to demonstrate added value of a GI project qualitatively, quantitatively, and monetarily, and to straightforwardly compare it with alternative spatial interpretations. Later on, I will guide you through the steps of the business model, but now I'll just hand over to Tako again.
Thanks, Wito, for sharing the foundations of the business model with us. We'll be hearing with you in a later stage of the program more about how this will actually look and work in practice.